right, now we're looking around the world, looking for the amount of salt in the ocean and the amount of dust on the earth. Let's continue on this. Look at BibleStudyManuals.net's K61.htm, and we got left off at this sentence. Since the ocean now contains approximately 315 million cubic miles of water, about 340 million if all the water in the Earth's crust and atmosphere, rivers, lakes, and so on is added in, the simple calculation would yield a figure of 315 to 340 million years as the maximum possible age of the Earth. Now, even on the assumption that all the water in the ocean is originated through volcanic action, once again, this is far less than 4 or 5 billion years. And of course, all of this completely ignores the revelation of the initial condition of the created earth in Genesis 1:2, which describes it as covered with water. Furthermore, it ignores the account of the deluge, when great volumes of juvenile water were caused to gush forth through the breaking up of the fountains of the great deep, and when great volumes of water entered the ocean through the dissipation of the canopy, which resulted in the worldwide flood when it collapsed over the earth. Somewhere, a somewhat similar analysis has been made the basis for the now widely held opinion among geologists that the ocean has indeed been derived by just this method. So W. Ruby, where he wrote, volume 62, page 1111, to the end. However, for reasons indicated, we believe Ruby and others have grossly overestimated the time involved. So at least he's leaning towards creation in a young earth, but still won't admit. The thinness of the earth's crust testifies to a recent creation and nullifies the concept of an old one. A duck is just more. Can you hear the duck? Take a look at the duck. You can see it. There's a duck down there. You can't quite see it. Anyway, beautiful little duck. One of God's creations. A mallard duck with a gorgeous, gorgeous, iridescent blue-green neck. The thinness of the earth's crust testifies to a recent creation and nullifies the concept of an old one. If the earth is as old as claimed, emission of volcanic materials at present rates would have produced a volume of material equal to or greater than the volume of rock in all the continents of the world. This is the basis of J.T. Wilson's remarkable theory that the Earth's crust has developed in just this way. The emission of lava at the present rate of 0.8 kilometers per year throughout the Earth's history of 4.5.109 years, or even for the 3 times 109 years since the oldest known rocks were formed, would have poured out lava on the order of this 3 times 109 kilometers on the Earth's surface. This corresponds approximately to the volume of the continents. Scientific figures here. A slightly higher rate of volcanism in the early stages of the Earth would allow for the emission of the oceanic crust as well. So Wilson, Geophysics and Continental Growth. So surely the idea that all the rock and soil materials of all the Earth's crusts have been built up by volcanic emissions during the geologic time is no less strange in terms of traditional uniformitarianism than is the deluge theory. Looking for a throat lozenge here. What a gorgeous duck. Although, as we have emphasized, volcanic lavas are of great extent over the Earth's surface, they nevertheless constitute a relatively small proportion of all rocks. Wilson's supposition is that the granites, and other rocks were originally lavas, which have since been eroded and metamorphosed from their original creation. Can't see this stuff, so let's just suppose. This theory is quite speculative, of course, and has not yet been attracted to any great following. Nevertheless, the arithmetical calculations lead to such a conclusion. Now you make it up and then support the figures with your own fictitious mathematics. In fact, more realistic calculations would show that the continents could have been derived by volcanic action in much less time than 4.5 billion years. This figure was based on an average lava emission of 0.8 kilometers per year, but this latter figure was taken from work by Sapper, which in turn was based on lava flows since 1500 AD. But it is apparent that this rate must be much less than the average rate during geologic time in view of the vastly greater extent of volcanic activity in the past than in the present. Even on the basis of present activity, however, this seems low. The material, lava and ash, derived from Barucatan in Mexico during its 10 years of activity were over 2,000 million cubic meters in volume, which therefore averaged 0.2 cubic kilometers per year. Thus, only 4 such volcanoes would produce Wilson's 0.8 cubic kilometers per year. If, as we have surmised, the minimum average figure should be at least 1,000 volcanoes, then the above estimate of age would be reduced from 4.5 billion to less than 20 million years. Trying to be realistic and favor their side, you can't even get to 20 million. And this on the assumption that all the Earth's crust developed uniformly in this manner. We're giving them every advantage, and they still can't come up to, 20 million years instead of 5 billion. Looking at the amount of pressure in underground and oil reserves testifies to a young Earth. Dr. Patton says he looked at the pressure in the oil reserve, and he says that the Earth's age is less than 10,000. You've got tremendous pressures there, and that's why you have the gushers sometimes very dramatically blowing debris into the atmosphere. We can measure the porosity of the rocks, and we know how much pressure they'll hold for how long. We find that the pressure will hold for just a few thousand years, and yet the pressure is still there today. Why is it there if the Earth is 5 billion years old? Conclusion. Methods of time measurement. We have now discussed a number of lines of evidence that seem plainly to show that the estimate of 4 or 5 billion years for the age of the Earth must be much too great. Such diversified processes as the fall of meteorites, the breakup of comets, the influx of dissolved chemicals into the ocean, the escape of helium into the atmosphere, the growth of the oceans, and the growth of continents by volcanism all give ages much less than this. And this is on the basis of the geologist's own principle of uniformity. Obviously, in terms of the revealed facts of an initial creation, and the great discontinuity of all natural processes at the time of the deluge, even these later ages must be much too large. And they are. Just how much too great is as impossible to determine by scientific calculation, as it is to determine the true age of the Earth by any of the radioactive minerals. Once again, we emphasize that only certain bases of prehistoric chronology must come by way of divine revelation. The only certain basis for this, then, must be through Scripture, through divine revelation. This revelation in the Bible records a creation and subsequent universal flood, both occurring only a few thousand years ago, and nothing in true science can possibly negate this, nor in fact, when the data are rightly understood, does it even seem to do so. So Dr. Patton says, we'll look at the illustrations given by William Stansfield, Professor of Biological Sciences, California Polytechnic State University. Now, he is an environmentalist. He is an anti-creationist, and he debates against creationism. He is very strongly opposed to the idea that the Earth is young, but he acknowledges that there are some strong indications of a young age for the Earth. For example, he cites water from volcanoes. It produces juvenile water. He said that it indicates the Earth is less than 500 million years old. He says that we've got about 600 active volcanoes around the world, and just 70 producing at the rate of the average would fill the oceans with water in about 4.5 billion years. That 600 we've got would do it in 500 million years, not 5 billion. He talked about the helium in the atmosphere. He said that indicates an age of less than 150 million. I think the figures indicate an age of less than 10,000. And even his dates certainly don't fit with the billions of years that are required for the evolutionist. He talked about lavas from volcanoes and points out that 4 volcanoes at the average rate of lava flow could produce the Earth's crust in 4 billion years. Yet we have 600 of them going active in the world today. We had many more before. And we know that the volcanic activity was much greater in the past. He talked about uranium accumulation. It's 100 times faster than it's been depleted from the ocean. It's accumulating rapidly. He said that that indicates an age of less than 1 million. He looked at the pressure in the oil reserves, and he says that the Earth's age is less than 10,000. You've got tremendous pressures there, and that's why you have the gushers sometimes very dramatically blowing debris into the atmosphere. We can measure the porosity of the rocks. We know how much pressure they'll hold for how long. We find that the pressure will hold for just a few thousand years. And yet there's the pressure still there today. We look at population dynamics, and we find that in 2 million years, supposedly to be the age of men, increasing at the population rate with only 2 people, beginning with, you get 102,700, which is just a ridiculously low number of people on the Earth. Just an infinitesimal portion of that. Stansfield says, this is what we have on Earth today. Meteorite dust, billions of tons per year coming to the Earth. Where is it? Disappears. No indication of that in the strata. There's good ways to detect it from the nickel. We talked about radiocarbon in the atmosphere, and he says that that indicates the Earth is less than 20,000 years old. It only takes 30,000 years to reach equilibrium, and it's 30% short. I think his figures are conservative, but he acknowledges that there are a lot of indications that indicate that the Earth is young. But he has an answer for that, of course. He doesn't believe in these indications, and his answer is seen as we continue to look at a quotation in his book, The Science of Evolution. He says, by this methodology, creationists stand guilty of the crime they ascribe to the evolutionists, namely uniformitarianism. That is, assuming everything remains the same, because we don't, but we're just saying for the sake of using their arguments. All of the above methods for the dating of the Earth, its various strata, are questionable, because the rates are likely to have fluctuated widely over our history. He said a method that appears to have much greater reliability for determining absolute ages of rocks is that of radiometric dating. So he looks at the great number that indicated the Earth is young and says we can chuck that because we know that this is a crime to assume things remain constant. I'm going to stick with the radiometric dating. But suppose, with the canopy overhead, the radiometric dating activity is much lower. But then he goes on to critique that in the next paragraph. He says, and I think that's a big if we assume that a rock contained no lead-206 when it was formed, it's a big if, all lead-206 now in the rock was produced by radioactive decay, U-238, and of course we know that that's not the case, there's original lead. The rate of decay has been constant, and a good reason to question that. There has been no differential leaching by water of either element, and we know that happens. And U-238 has been transported into the rock from another source. A lot of assumptions that can't be proved. And I would add, and you know that this has been constant for billions of years, which really makes it extreme. Then he says, with all these assumptions, then we might expect our estimated age to be fairly accurate. Each assumption is a potential variable, the magnitude of which can seldom be ascertained. This is not science, and yet he's a scientist with a very high respected institution. Well, I'll accept his conclusion regarding this. And notice the next paragraph, which I think is a fair assessment of the reasonableness of these assumptions. He says that radiometric techniques may not be the absolute dating methods that they are claimed to be. Age estimates on a given geological stratum by different radiometric methods are quite often different by wide margins. But he says in cases where the daughter product is a gas, as in the decay of potassium argon to the gas argon, it is essential that none of the gas escapes from the rock over long periods of time, and as we know that's not the case. It is obvious that radiometric methods are quite often quite different, sometimes by hundreds of millions of years with one another. There's absolutely no reliable long-term radiological clock. And there you have it. We'll continue from next.